What does it cost to be kind for the ruthless tech billionaire Samuel Hayes? It was supposed to cost nothing. He believed kindness was a currency for the weak, a handout he refused to give. So when he stiffed a hard-working waitress on a tip, he saw it as just another business principle. But he never imagined who her father was. He never calculated that this one act of casual cruelty, this $0 tip, was about to trigger a chain reaction that would cost him not just billions of dollars, but the very foundation of the empire he had built. This is the story of how a single dinner destroyed a titan. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't a restaurant, it was a statement. Tucked away on a quiet, cobblestoned street in downtown Boston, it was a sanctuary of hushed tones, where old money whispered to new, and deals that shaped the city's skyline were brokered over seared foie gras and vintage Bordeaux. The air itself seemed expensive, scented with truffle oil and quiet ambition, and tonight its apex predator was Samuel Hayes. Samuel didn't just occupy his corner booth, he commanded it. At 42, he was a monument to brutal efficiency, carved from sharp angles and cold ambition. His suit was a custom Tom Ford, a shade of charcoal so dark it seemed to absorb the soft ambient light of the restaurant. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe Nautilus, its stainless steel case a subtle flex that screamed louder than any gold. He hadn't inherited his fortune. He'd ripped it from the world with his bare hands, building his tech empire, Apex Innovations, from a garage startup into a global behemoth. He believed in merit, in strength, and in the fundamental truth that the world was divided into two groups, those who take and those who are taken from. His dining companion, a junior venture capitalist named Leo, was practically vibrating with nervous energy, laughing a little too loudly at Samuel's dry remarks. They were closing a minor acquisition, a formality, but for Leo, this dinner was an audition. "The server-side latency is a joke," Samuel was saying, not looking up from his phone as he scrolled through a market analysis. "Fire the entire development team. Rebuild it from scratch. I don't pay for mediocrity." "Absolutely, Samuel. A complete overhaul." Leo agreed, nodding vigorously. A young woman approached the table, her movements fluid and practiced, despite the subtle weariness in her eyes. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Isabelle, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with some water for the table? We have a sparkling Italian or a still Norwegian." Samuel didn't look up. He waved a dismissive hand. "Just bring the Norwegian, and a bottle of the 05 Petrus. Don't bother asking if I want to taste it. Just open it and pour." Isabelle didn't flinch. She'd served men like him before. Men who saw her not as a person, but as a function, an extension of the table. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice even and pleasant. She gave a small, genuine smile to Leo, who looked momentarily flustered. "I'll be right back with that for you." As she walked away, Samuel finally pocketed his phone. "See that?" he murmured to Leo, a glint of steel in his grey eyes. "That forced pleasantry. That's the problem with the service industry. It's built on a foundation of transactional insincerity. They smile for a tip. It's a handout for doing a job they're already paid to do. It's a flawed system." Leo, unsure if he was supposed to agree, just offered a non-committal, "Right, flawed." Isabelle Rossi was not, in fact, thinking about the tip. Not yet. She was thinking about the organic chemistry textbook sitting in her locker, its pages filled with formulas that swam before her eyes late at night. She was a junior at Boston University on a partial scholarship, studying to be a pediatric nurse. The Gilded Sparrow, with its high-end clientele and potential for big tips, was supposed to be the bridge that covered the gap between her scholarship and the crippling tuition fees. Every dollar counted. More than that, she was thinking about her mother's latest medical bill, which had arrived that morning. It sat on her small kitchen table, a stark white envelope, holding a number that made her stomach clench. Her mother, a retired schoolteacher living in a small town in Vermont, was fighting a second round of cancer. The insurance covered most of it, but not all. The all was what kept Isabelle on her feet for 10-hour shifts, smiling through the condescension of men like Samuel Hayes. She returned with the wine, presenting the bottle to Samuel, as was customary. He waved her on impatiently. She expertly uncorked it, the pop barely a whisper, and poured a precise measure into his glass. He swirled it, sniffed it, and took a sip, his face a mask of cold evaluation. "It's acceptable," he declared, as if passing judgment on a piece of code. For the next hour, Isabelle was the model of perfect service. She anticipated their needs, refilling water glasses before they were empty, clearing plates with silent efficiency. She described the specials a pan-seared halibut with a saffron risotto, a dry-aged ribeye from a local farm, with a genuine appreciation for the craft of the chef. Samuel ordered the ribeye rare. Leo, a vegetarian, ordered the risotto. Samuel scoffed. "You can't disrupt the world on a diet of rice and flowers, Leo." Throughout the meal, Samuel was deliberately difficult. He sent back his first steak, claiming it was medium rare, not rare, though to Isabelle's trained eye, it was a perfect ruby red. He complained that the background music, a soft, classical jazz trio, was distracting. He quizzed Isabelle on the exact origin of the asparagus, not out of curiosity, but as a test of her knowledge, a way to assert his dominance. Isabelle answered every query with grace and precision. "The asparagus is from Hadley, Massachusetts, sir. It's famous for its rich soil. The chef has a direct relationship with the farm." He simply grunted, unimpressed. He saw her competence not as a sign of skill, but as the bare minimum. He was paying a premium for this experience. Excellence was expected, not rewarded. As she cleared their main course plates, she felt a familiar ache in the arches of her feet. It was nearing 10 o'clock, and she had a midterm to study for. But the table of 6 across the room had tipped her $200, a generous gesture from a family celebrating an anniversary. That had buoyed her spirits. If this table, with its $1,000 bottle of wine, tipped even the standard 20%, she could pay off the entirety of her mother's bill tonight and still have enough for next week's groceries. A wave of relief washed over her at the thought. "Will there be anything else for you this evening? Dessert, or perhaps a coffee?" she asked, her smile still in place. Samuel gestured for the check. "Just the bill. We're done here." As Isabelle walked away to print the invoice, a knot of hope and anxiety tightened in her stomach. This was the moment of truth. This was the moment that would decide if her night was a victory or just another long, exhausting shift. The check arrived in a small black leather folio. The total was $1,845.50. The pay-through alone accounted for the bulk of it. Leo glanced at the bill, and then at Samuel, his eyes wide. Samuel didn't even blink. He pulled out a sleek black titanium credit card, an invitation-only card that had no spending limit, and placed it in the folio. Isabelle returned to the table. "Thank you, sir. I'll be right back." Her heart was beating a little faster. A standard tip on this amount would be over $350. Even a mediocre tip would be life-changing for her week. It was the kind of table servers dreamed of. She ran the card and returned with the folio, placing it discreetly on the table between the two men. "Thank you again for dining with us," she said warmly. "Have a wonderful evening." She turned and walked away, busying herself at a nearby service station, organizing silverware to give them their privacy. She didn't want to seem like she was hovering eagerly awaiting her reward. But every nerve in her body was attuned to that corner booth. Inside the booth, Samuel picked up the pen. He looked at the tip line. He saw the suggested gratuity calculations printed at the bottom. 18%, $332. 19-20%, $369.10 $461.38. He smirked. A quarter of his bill for a girl to carry plates back and forth, absurd. It was a tax on success, a charity demanded at the point of sale. He believed tipping was a cancer on efficiency. It incentivized fake charm over genuine skill. It was a crutch for businesses to underpay their staff, a system that perpetuated weakness. He wasn't just going to leave a bad tip. He was going to make a statement. He drew a sharp, definitive line through the tip section and wrote a large, emphatic, 0 doses eso. Leo watched him, his jaw tight. He felt a pang of second-hand embarrassment. He'd worked as a busboy in college. He knew what this meant. But he was here to impress Samuel Hayes, not to police his ethics. He remained silent. But Samuel wasn't finished. He flipped over the merchant copy of the receipt. On the blank back, he uncapped his expensive fountain pen and wrote in crisp, neat letters, a word of advice: stop expecting handouts. Payment is for the job you're hired to do. A tip is a bonus for exceptional service, which is a myth. The only way to get ahead in this world is by providing undeniable value, not by smiling for charity. Do better. He placed the receipt back in the folio, the note facing up, and stood. Let's go, Leo. I have a 7 a.m. call with Tokyo. He strode out of the restaurant without a backward glance, a king leaving his court, Leo trailing like a nervous page. Isabelle waited a respectable minute before approaching the table. The busboy, a high school kid named Sam, was already there, ready to clear the water glasses. I've got it, Sam, she said gently, her stomach fluttering. She picked up the leather folio. It felt heavier than it should. She opened it. The first thing she saw was the bold 0.0 on the tip line. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she thought it must be a mistake. Had he forgotten? Maybe he was paying the tip in cash. She quickly looked around the booth under the table on the cushioned seat. Nothing. Just crumbs and a crumpled napkin. Then she saw the note. Her eyes scanned the words, each one a tiny, precise jab. Handouts. Charity. Do better. The blood drained from her face. It wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate, calculated act of cruelty. It was a judgment on her character, on her work ethic, on her very worth. The warmth of the restaurant suddenly felt cold and suffocating. The gentle hum of conversation faded into a dull roar in her ears. She felt a hot sting behind her eyes, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in the middle of the floor. She could feel the stares of her colleagues, the pitying glance from the bartender. Sam looked at the receipt in her hand, and then at her face, his own expression, a mixture of anger and sympathy. What a jerk, he muttered. Isabelle just shook her head, folding the receipt and tucking it into her apron pocket. The paper felt like a block of ice against her skin. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the humiliation. He hadn't just stiffed her. He had lectured her, branded her a beggar from his lofty perch of wealth and power. Her manager, Mr. Davies, a man whose personality was as starched as his shirt, sidled up to her. "Problem, Rossi?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the empty booth. "No, sir. No problem," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Good. Table 12 needs their check." He walked away oblivious, or more likely, indifferent. The $350 she had been counting on vanished, leaving a gaping hole in her plans. The relief she had felt earlier was replaced by a familiar, heavy dread. The medical bill on her kitchen table seemed to loom larger, its numbers bolder. The weight of her double life, full-time student and full-time caregiver by proxy, pressed down on her shoulders. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and forced her face into a mask of professionalism. She had 3 more tables to close out. Crying wouldn't pay the bills. But as she walked toward table 12, the billionaire's words echoed in her mind. Do better. She was doing the best she could. She was killing herself doing it. And to him it was worth nothing. Absolutely nothing. Samuel Hayes slept the way he did everything else, efficiently and without wasted motion. He was in bed by 11 p.m. and up at 4:30 a.m., his mind already churning through market data and corporate strategy before the sun even thought about rising. The dinner at the Gilded Sparrow was a forgotten footnote, a minor transaction in a life filled with monumental ones. The note he'd left was in his mind, a small act of public service, a lesson in self-reliance for a world that had grown soft. His morning was a blur of calculated productivity, a 30-minute high-intensity workout in his state-of-the-art home gym, a protein-optimized smoothie prepared by his personal chef, and then the 7 a.m. call with his Tokyo team. By 9 a.m., he was in his office on the 50th floor of the Apex Tower, a glass and steel monolith that dominated the Boston skyline. His view was panoramic, a god's-eye perspective of the city. He could see the Prue, the Hancock Tower, the winding Charles River. He couldn't see the small walk-up apartment in the North End, where Isabelle Rossi was waking up after 3 hours of fitful sleep. Isabelle had finally gotten home around 1 a.m., her body aching and her mind numb. She'd sat at her kitchen table, staring at her mother's bill and the cruel note from Samuel Hayes, which she'd smoothed out beside it. The words seemed to mock the bill, the 2 documents representing the twin poles of her existence, overwhelming need and overwhelming indifference. She had eventually opened her chemistry book, but the words blurred into meaningless symbols. Sleep had been a temporary escape, but the anxiety was still there when she woke, a bitter taste in her mouth. Back in his office, Samuel was preparing for the most important meeting of his career. For 6 months, he had been aggressively pursuing a strategic partnership with Horizon Capital Group, a legendary and notoriously private investment firm. Horizon wasn't just another source of capital. They were kingmakers. An investment from them didn't just mean money, it meant a stamp of legitimacy that was priceless. The man at the helm of Horizon was a phantom, a whisper in the financial world, Richard Chen. Chen was the antithesis of the modern billionaire. He gave no interviews, had almost no online presence, and his photograph hadn't been publicly seen in over a decade. He was old-school, a man who operated on handshakes, instinct, and a fierce, unyielding code of personal integrity. He was known to walk away from 9-figure deals if he sensed a character flaw in a potential partner. Samuel wanted Horizon to lead the funding for his most ambitious project yet, Project Daedalus, a global satellite internet initiative that would make Apex Innovations the undisputed ruler of worldwide connectivity. Getting Chen's backing would cement Samuel's legacy. It was the final jewel in his crown. After months of relentless effort, his assistant Chloe had finally secured a face-to-face meeting. "He's confirmed for lunch tomorrow," Chloe said, standing before his massive mahogany desk. 1 p.m. His office sent the location this morning. "Good," Samuel said, leaning back in his chair. "Where is it?" "The Capitol Grill Mastro's." Chloe hesitated, looking down at her tablet. "Actually, it's the Gilded Sparrow." Samuel frowned. Of all the places in Boston, it had to be that one. "Fine." He snapped, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Book the same booth I had last night. The corner one, it's quiet." He didn't connect the waitress to the location. To him, she had been a non-entity, a ghost in a uniform. "I've tried Mr. Hayes," Chloe said apologetically. Mr. Chen's assistant was very specific. He has a preferred table. Table 7. It's by the window. Table 7. Samuel repeated the name, meaning nothing to him. Whatever. Just make sure everything is perfect. Alert the restaurant. Tell them who I'm meeting. I want their A-team on service. No mistakes. Of course, Mr. Hayes. Meanwhile, Isabelle was forcing down a piece of toast before her 10 a.m. lecture. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her father. Dad, hey sweetheart. Big day tomorrow. I'm finally in Boston. How about I treat you to lunch? My meeting should be done by 2:30. Pick a place you like. My treat. Isabelle smiled for the first time that morning. Her father Richard was a traveling consultant for a boutique engineering firm, or so she'd always been told. He was on the road constantly, a loving but often distant presence in her life. Her parents had divorced when she was young. She had her mother's Italian looks and surname, but her father's quiet determination. She knew he worked hard, but he was always vague about the specifics. She just knew he made a comfortable living. Izzy, Dad. That's amazing, I'd love to. But I have to work a lunch shift tomorrow. The Gilded Sparrow. Why don't you come here? You can be my last table of the day. It's fancy, but my discount will make it almost reasonable, love you. She sent the text and hurried out the door, the weight on her shoulders feeling just a little bit lighter. Seeing her dad was always a bright spot. The next day, Samuel Hayes arrived at the Gilded Sparrow at 12:45 p.m., 15 minutes early. He was dressed in another immaculate suit, this one a sharp navy blue. He felt the familiar surge of power as he walked in, the maître d' fawning over him. Mr. Hayes, a pleasure to have you back with us. Mr. Chen's table is ready for you. As he was led to table 7, he scanned the room. His eyes briefly passed over the servers moving between tables. He saw a flash of familiar dark hair and a slender figure. It was the waitress from the other night. Isabelle. He felt a brief, irritating prickle of recognition. Her again. He hoped she wouldn't be their server. Her cloying, try-hard pleasantness was exactly the kind of thing he found grating. He dismissed her from his thoughts as he sat down, pulling out his tablet to review his talking points one last time. He was ready. This was his stage. At that exact moment, Isabelle was in the kitchen, telling her manager, Mr. Davies, that she needed to take her break at 2:30 p.m. My dad is coming in for a late lunch, she explained. I want to be able to sit with him. Fine, Rossi. Davies sighed. But make sure your section is covered. And the lunch rush today is brutal. I need you focused. I will be, she promised. She was excited. It had been months since she'd seen her father. She wondered what he would think of the place where she worked, this world of casual, unimaginable wealth. She hoped he wouldn't be intimidated. At precisely 1 p.m., the front door of the restaurant opened. An older gentleman walked in. He was of medium height, with salt and pepper hair and a calm, dignified air. He wore a simple, well-tailored grey suit, but no tie. His face was kind, with intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He radiated an aura not of aggression or power like Samuel, but of profound, unshakable stillness. The maître d' hurried to greet him. Mr. Chen, welcome. Mr. Hayes is already seated. As he was led toward table 7, his eyes scanned the dining room. He wasn't looking for his business partner. He was looking for someone else. Then he saw her standing by a server station, refilling a salt shaker. A broad, warm smile broke across his face. And in a voice loud enough to carry across the hushed restaurant, a voice filled with pure, undiluted affection, he called out, "Izzy, sweetheart." Samuel Hayes looked up from his tablet, his concentration shattered by the unexpected familiarity in the man's voice. He watched as the legendary Richard Chen, the man he'd spent months trying to meet, broke away from the maitre d' and walked directly toward the waitress, his waitress, the one he had so coldly dismissed less than 48 hours ago. Isabelle's head snapped up. "Dad!" She whispered, her eyes wide with surprise. She had expected him at 2:30. A wave of confusion followed by pure joy washed over her. She rushed forward and met him halfway. Richard Chen wrapped his daughter in a warm, tight hug, kissing the top of her head. "I couldn't wait," he said, his voice rumbling with affection. "My morning meeting ended early. Thought I'd surprise you." "It's the best surprise." She beamed, holding on to him. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She wasn't Isabelle the server. She was just Izzy, her father's daughter. From table 7, Samuel watched this scene unfold with a growing sense of disbelief that was rapidly curdling into ice-cold dread. It was like watching two separate, incompatible computer programs trying to run at the same time, causing the entire system to crash. Richard Chen, the titan of industry, hugging a waitress, calling her Izzy sweetheart, his mind, a machine built for rapid calculation and pattern recognition, began to spin furiously. Chen, Izzy, the gilded sparrow. The pieces of the puzzle were floating in front of him, but they formed a picture so impossible, so cataclysmic, that his brain refused to assemble them. Richard released his daughter, holding her at arm's length. "You look tired, honey. Are they working you too hard here?" "I'm fine, Dad. Just busy," she said, her smile not quite reaching her tired eyes. Her gaze flickered past her father's shoulder and landed on table 7. She saw Samuel Hayes sitting there watching them. His face was a pale, frozen mask. Her smile faltered. The joy of her father's arrival was instantly tainted by a jolt of anxiety. Of all the tables in this restaurant, why did her father's meeting have to be with him? Richard followed her gaze and saw Samuel. "Ah, there's my lunch appointment. Izzy, this is Mr. Hayes. We're discussing a potential partnership." He gestured toward the table. "Mr. Hayes, I'd like you to meet my daughter, Isabelle." Samuel felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. The air in his lungs turned to stone. "Daughter." The word echoed in the sudden roaring silence of his mind. Richard Chen's daughter. Isabelle Rossi, or Isabelle Chen. It didn't matter. The connection was made. The circuit was complete. And a surge of pure, unadulterated panic, an emotion he hadn't felt since his company was on the verge of bankruptcy a decade ago, coursed through him. He forced himself to his feet, his movements stiff and robotic. "Mr. Chen," he managed to say, his voice sounding foreign and strained to his own ears. He extended a hand, which Richard shook firmly. "A pleasure to finally meet you in person." He then turned his attention to Isabelle. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not a uniform, but a young woman with her father's intelligent eyes. He saw the flicker of apprehension, the forced professionalism she was struggling to maintain. And he saw himself through her eyes, a cruel, arrogant man who had humiliated her for sport. "Isabelle," he said her name, feeling like ash in his mouth. "We've met." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. He was a man who noticed everything, the tension in Samuel's posture, the sudden pallor of his skin, the way his daughter refused to meet the man's gaze. "Oh, you've been in before?" Richard asked casually, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. "Yes." "The other night," Samuel said quickly. "Isabelle was my server. She was excellent." The word felt like a lie, a desperate, clumsy attempt to patch a hole in a sinking ship. Isabelle finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want to jeopardize her father's important meeting. "My father is your appointment, Mr. Hayes. I should let you get to it," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I'll send another server over for your table. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to wait on you." "Nonsense," Richard said, waving a hand and sliding into the booth. "You're the best server in the house, I'm sure." "Sit, Mr. Hayes. Izzy, if you wouldn't mind taking our order, I'd appreciate it. Then you can join us when your shift is over." It was a command dressed as a request. For Isabelle, it was a nightmare. For Samuel, it was the beginning of a slow, torturous execution. He sat down, his limbs feeling heavy and unresponsive. He was trapped. The corner booth that had felt like a seat of power 2 nights ago now felt like a defendant's box. Isabelle retrieved her notepad, her professionalism a shield against the swirling chaos inside her. "Of course, Dad. Mr. Hayes. What can I get for you to start?" Her voice was steady, but Samuel could hear the slight tremor beneath the surface. He was a predator who had cornered his prey, only to find it was the beloved offspring of the jungle's true king. And the king was watching him very, very closely. The lunch began with a tension so thick it felt like another presence at the table. Samuel, normally a master of control and command, found himself completely adrift. Every instinct screamed at him to apologize, to explain, to do something. But what could he say? "I'm sorry, I philosophically disagree with tipping, which led me to humiliate your daughter, whom I had no idea was your daughter." The thought itself was absurd. Richard Chen, meanwhile, was a study in calm. He steered the conversation with effortless grace, first asking Isabelle about her classes. "How's that organic chemistry course going, sweetheart? Still giving you trouble?" He asked, his tone warm and engaged. "It's tough, but I think I'm getting the hang of it," Isabelle replied, carefully placing their water glasses on the table. "The professor is brilliant, just very demanding." "That's the best kind," Richard said with a smile, before turning his gaze to Samuel. The warmth in his eyes instantly cooled to a neutral, assessing temperature. "Isabelle is studying to be a pediatric nurse. She has a brilliant mind for science and an even better heart for people. A rare combination." "That's admirable," Samuel managed to choke out. The words felt hollow. A nurse, someone who dedicates their life to caring for others, and he had called her a beggar. The chasm between his perception and her reality was staggering. Isabelle took their order. Richard chose the seared halibut. Samuel, his appetite having completely vanished, ordered the same. "So, Project Daedalus," Richard said, leaning forward slightly as Isabelle walked away. "Your proposal was ambitious, aggressive, perhaps even audacious. I like that. But I found that the success of any venture, no matter how brilliant the idea, comes down to the character of the person leading it. Tell me, Mr. Hayes, what are your core principles in business?" It was a softball question, a standard part of any high-stakes meeting. Samuel had a polished, rehearsed answer for this, a speech about relentless innovation, stakeholder value, and market disruption. He opened his mouth to deliver it, but the words wouldn't come. All he could think about was the note in his pocket, the one he'd considered leaving, and the other one, the real one, now tucked away in Isabelle's apron. How could he speak of character when his own had been so monstrously exposed? "I believe in efficiency," he began, his voice faltering. "In eliminating waste. I believe that merit should be the sole determinant of success. We build systems where the best ideas and the hardest workers rise to the top." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Samuel's face. An interesting philosophy. A corporate meritocracy. But systems are run by people, and people can be unpredictable. How do you handle the human element? The team members who aren't your top performers, the support staff who make the work of your hardest workers possible. It was a direct hit, a sniper's bullet. Samuel could feel the sweat beading on his forehead. Everyone has a role to play. They are compensated fairly for that role. Compensated fairly, Richard repeated, letting the words hang in the air. A fair wage for a fair day's work. It's a clean equation. But business, like life, is rarely that clean, is it? There are intangibles. Goodwill, morale, respect. How do you quantify respect in a balance sheet? Mr. Hayes. Before Samuel could formulate an answer, Isabelle returned with a basket of fresh bread and olive oil. She moved with quiet grace, her presence a constant silent accusation. Richard smiled at her. Thank you, sweetheart. Everything looks wonderful. He then looked back at Samuel. You were in here 2 nights ago, you said. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. Yes. A business dinner. How was your experience? Richard asked, his tone deceptively light. The service in particular. Did it meet your standards? This was it. The interrogation had begun in earnest. Samuel felt trapped between 2 impossible choices, lie and risk being exposed, or tell the truth and confirm he was a monster. The service was efficient, he said, seizing on his earlier word. Efficient, Richard mused, picking up a piece of bread. He looked at Isabelle, who was now standing a few feet away, ostensibly checking on another table, but clearly within earshot. Izzy is a hard worker. Always has been. When she was a kid, she had a lemonade stand. She'd spend hours squeezing lemons by hand because she said it tasted better. She charged 50 cents a cup. One day, our neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, gave her a $5 bill and told her to keep the change. You know what she did? Samuel shook his head, dreading the answer. She tried to give it back, Richard said with a soft chuckle. She said, that's not fair, I didn't earn that much. I had to explain to her that Mr. Henderson wasn't just paying for the lemonade. He was paying for the smile she gave him, for the care she took. He was investing in her. It wasn't charity. It was an acknowledgement of value beyond the transaction. The story was a parable, and Samuel was its intended audience. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, puncturing his arrogant philosophy. The food arrived, but Samuel couldn't have tasted it if it were made of solid gold. He moved it around his plate with his fork, his stomach in a tight, acid-filled knot. Richard ate his fish with relish, but his questions never stopped. They were subtle weaving between business and personal philosophy. He asked about employee turnover at Apex, about their corporate culture, about how Samuel treated his lowest-paid employees. Each question felt like a turn of the screw. Finally, as Isabelle came to clear their plates, Richard laid his trap. You know Izzy, he said, looking at his daughter with concerned eyes. You seem a little down today. Was it a tough shift the other night? Any difficult customers? Isabelle froze for a fraction of a second. She glanced at Samuel, whose face had gone ashen. She knew exactly what her father was doing. He was giving her the power. Her answer to this question would determine the fate of Samuel Hayes. She could destroy him right here with a single honest sentence. She looked at her father and then back at the terrified man in the booth. And in that moment she made a decision. She would not be like him. She would not use her power to humiliate someone, no matter how much they deserved it. Every shift has its ups and downs, Dad. She said, her voice soft but firm. It's just part of the job. Nothing I can't handle. She offered a small professional smile. Would you care for some coffee or dessert? Samuel stared at her, stunned. She had given him an out. She had shown him a grace he hadn't earned, and certainly didn't deserve. The reprieve, however, was temporary, because, while Isabelle had chosen mercy, Richard Chen had not yet made his decision, and he had seen everything he needed to see. Richard Chen ordered an espresso. Samuel declined, wanting nothing more than for this excruciating ordeal to end. As Isabelle walked away to place the order, a heavy silence descended on the table. It was no longer the silence of tension, but the silence of a verdict about to be delivered. Richard took a slow sip of water, placed his glass down with deliberate precision, and folded his hands on the table. He looked directly at Samuel, and the affable, fatherly demeanor was gone. In its place was the cold, analytical gaze of a man who commanded billions and built empires on the strength of his judgment. "You are a brilliant man, Mr. Hayes." Richard began, his voice low and even. "Your vision for Project Daedalus is transformative. Your numbers are sound. Your strategy is aggressive. On paper, you are an ideal partner." Samuel felt a flicker of hope, a desperate, irrational belief that he might still salvage this. "But I don't invest in paper," Richard continued, his voice dropping even further, forcing Samuel to lean in. "I invest in people. I've built my entire career on one principle. Character is the only asset that can't be leveraged, liquidated, or bought out. It is the bedrock of everything." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "For the past hour, I've listened to you talk about merit and efficiency. But those are sterile, empty words without a foundation of basic human decency. You talk about creating systems, but you seem to forget that those systems are populated by human beings with their own struggles and hopes." Isabelle returned with the espresso and placed it in front of her father. She lingered for a moment, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Richard looked from Samuel to his daughter and back again. "My daughter puts herself through a demanding nursing program while working nearly full-time in a physically and emotionally draining job. She does it to pay her tuition and to help with her mother's medical bills. She comes here and serves people with a grace and professionalism that you in your boardroom could learn from. She is the very definition of a hard worker, providing undeniable value." He had quoted the note. Samuel flinched, as if he'd been physically struck. The blood roared in his ears. He knew. Of course he knew. "She did not tell me what happened 2 nights ago." Richard said, his voice now laced with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any shout. "She is too good a person for that. But I saw it the moment I introduced you. I saw it in your panic, and I saw it in her pain. I saw the ghost of your cruelty haunting this table." He leaned back, his expression one of profound disappointment. "You see, Mr. Hayes, the tip was never about the money. I could give my daughter the money. That's easy. It's about respect. It's a small, simple acknowledgement that you see the person in front of you, that you recognize their effort. It is a microcosm of how you view the world. Do you see people as partners in a shared human experience, or as tools to be used and discarded?" Samuel could say nothing. His throat was closed, his mind a blank slate of horror. Every defense, every justification had been stripped away, leaving only the ugly truth of his actions. "The way you treated my daughter," Richard said, his voice a final cutting blade, "tells me everything I need to know. It tells me you see your employees as expendable. It tells me you see your customers as numbers on a spreadsheet. It tells me you would cut any corner, betray any partner, and sacrifice any principle to get what you want. A man who is cruel for no reason when he thinks no one of consequence is watching is a man I cannot trust when the stakes are high. He picked up his napkin and placed it on the table. The meal was officially over. Horizon Capital will not be investing in Project Daedalus. We will not be entering into any partnership with Apex Innovations now or in the future. The deal is off. The words delivered so quietly had the force of a tectonic plate shifting. Billions of dollars in valuation, months of work, the future of his company, all of it evaporated in an instant. It wasn't just a lost deal. It was a public execution in the hushed dining room of the Gilded Sparrow. The whisper network of the financial world would have this story by nightfall. Richard Chen didn't just walk away from deals, he set fires to them. Samuel Hayes would be marked. "Please send my compliments to the chef," Richard said to his daughter, ignoring the shattered man across from him. The halibut was excellent. He stood up straight and dignified. He pulled out his wallet, but Isabelle put a hand on his arm. "It's on me, Dad," she said softly. "Employee discount." Richard smiled a sad, proud smile. "All right, sweetheart. I'll be waiting for you outside when your shift is over." He gave her a quick hug, turned, and walked out of the restaurant without a single backward glance at the man whose empire he had just crippled. Samuel Hayes remained seated, frozen in the booth. He was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of his own arrogance. The restaurant hummed around him, oblivious. People laughed, glasses clinked. But for him, the world had gone completely silent. He had built his life on the principle of taking, and in the end, a simple act of refusing to give had taken everything from him. For a long time, Samuel just sat there. The espresso cup left by Richard Chen was like a relic from a forgotten civilization. Mr. Davies, the manager, hovered nearby, sensing a disturbance in the force, but too intimidated to approach. Finally, Samuel moved. He rose from the table on unsteady legs, feeling older and heavier than he had 2 hours ago. He walked out of the Gilded Sparrow, past the sympathetic glances of the staff, and into the harsh afternoon light. The city he usually saw as his kingdom now seemed alien and mocking. The apex tower, his gleaming monument to himself, looked like a tombstone in the distance. He didn't go back to the office. He got in his chauffeured car and told the driver to just drive. They circled the city for hours, a ghost in a luxury machine, as the consequences of his actions began to cascade. His phone started buzzing relentlessly. First it was Chloe, his assistant, in a panic, then his CFO, then a board member. The news was already out. A junior analyst at a rival firm who was dining at the restaurant had seen the whole exchange, put 2 and 2 together, and sent out an alert. Richard Chen walks out on Samuel Hayes mid-meal. By the time the market closed, Apex Innovations' stock had plummeted by 17%, wiping out over $3 billion of the company's value. His value. But for the first time in his life, the money wasn't what consumed him. It was the echo of Richard Chen's words, "Character is the only asset," and the image of Isabelle's face, her quiet dignity, as she refused to condemn him, even when he deserved it more than anything. She had shown him grace. Her father had shown him justice. He had spent his life believing that kindness was a weakness, a flaw in the system to be exploited. He saw it now for what it was, a strength he had never possessed. His cruelty, which he had mistaken for power, was revealed to be nothing more than a profound and pathetic insecurity. He built an empire of glass and steel, but his foundation was rotten. The car passed the Gilded Sparrow again. It was late evening now. On an impulse, Samuel told the driver to stop. He got out and stood across the street, watching the warm light spill from its windows. He saw Isabelle exit, bundled in a coat, a backpack slung over her shoulder. Richard Chen was there waiting for her by a modest sedan. He hugged her, and they got in the car and drove away. A father and a daughter, their bond, visible even from a distance. And Samuel felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years, a profound, aching loneliness. He went home, not to his sterile penthouse, but to the small working-class neighborhood where he'd grown up. He walked the streets he'd fought so hard to escape. He saw the tired faces of people leaving late shifts, people who worked jobs like Isabelle's, and for the first time he didn't see them as cogs in a machine. He saw them as people. The next day, he didn't go into the office. He sent a single email to his board, taking full responsibility for the failed partnership negotiations. Then he did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He wrote a letter. By hand. It wasn't to Richard Chen. He knew that bridge was permanently burned. It was to Isabelle. It took him hours. He filled a wastebasket with crumpled, discarded drafts. How could he apologize for a world view? Finally, he just wrote the truth. He wrote about his own impoverished childhood, about the bitterness that had taken root in him, about how he had come to see the world as a battle to be won, rather than a place to be lived in. He didn't make excuses. He just explained. He ended it simply. You deserved respect, and I gave you contempt. I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, only to offer my profound and sincere apology. Your father said I lacked character. He was right. Thank you for showing me what it looks like. He enclosed a check for $10,000, not as a tip, but with a note designating it as a contribution to her mother's medical care. He knew she might not accept it, but he had to try. He sent it via messenger to the Gilded Sparrow, addressed to Isabelle Rossi. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at his office. It was his letter returned. But inside, the check was gone. In its place was the original receipt from his dinner, the one with his cruel note on the back. Scrawled underneath his own arrogant handwriting were 4 new words in a simple, elegant script. It's never too late. Samuel Hayes stared at those words for a very long time. The stock would eventually recover. He would find other deals. But he knew he had been fundamentally changed. The annihilation of his deal was not the end of his story, but the violent, necessary death of the man he had been. The path forward was long, and redemption was not guaranteed. But for the first time, he understood that true wealth wasn't measured in billions of dollars, but in the small, priceless currency of human decency. It was a lesson that had cost him an empire, but might just save his soul. Thank you for listening to this story. It's a powerful reminder that our smallest actions, especially how we treat those in service to us, can have the biggest consequences. A person's true character isn't revealed when they're in the spotlight, but when they think no one of importance is watching. Samuel Hayes learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible, losing a multi-billion-dollar deal, not because of a bad business plan, but because of a bad heart. What do you think? Was Richard Chen's judgment too harsh, or did Samuel get exactly what he deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you and you believe in the power of kindness and character, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next story.